Chat with Traders, episode 106.
This is your key to the minds of trading's elite performers, those who profit in relentless markets. Here on the Chat with Traders podcast, you'll hear about the skill sets and tactics that lead winning traders to win, so you can level up and become a better trader. Here's your host, Aaron Fifield.
Guys, here's a quick shout out to our sponsor, TradeStation, for supporting this episode. Team, if you're opening your first brokerage account or in the market for a new broker, I encourage you to visit tradestation.com to see what they have on offer. I wish I would have opened an account with them a long time ago. Their commissions are fair. Their platform has so many really great features and tools, etc. And I think you'll agree with me once you try them out. Visit tradestation.com to learn more. And while we're at it, I'm also going to give a mention to Edgewonk. Not a sponsor per se, but I've worked out a pretty sweet deal with Edgewonk for Chat with Traders listeners that will save you $20 on their trade journaling software. So if you need an efficient way to journal, track, review, and analyze your past trades, Edgewonk is the way to go. See all the features at edgewonk.com. That's EDGEWONK, edgewonk.com, and enter the coupon code TRADERS during checkout to save $20. So here we are, team, for the first episode of 2017. I do hope there are big things in store for you this year, so let's go. My guest, who you're about to hear from, is Turney Duff. Long story short, Turney was a hedge fund trader on Wall Street who led a truly excessive lifestyle. In 2013, he released a book about his experiences titled The Buy Side, and currently, Turney is a consultant on the Showtime TV series Billions. On this episode, we cover everything from what it was like to trade more than $1 billion at Galleon Group, which was the hedge fund run by Raj Rajaratnam, currently serving an 11-year prison sentence for partaking in one of the largest insider trading cases in US history. Following on from this, we discussed Turney's relationships with the sell side and the extreme measures they'd take to win his business, which then led us into their shenanigans, which took place after hours, the cocktail of drugs, alcohol, sex, money, and power. We finish up with Turney's fall from the top, some of the greatest realizations he's come to, and the life he leads today. Please enjoy this episode, guys. Here it is. My guest, Turney Duff. I noticed that you've had some involvement with the TV show Billions. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? I think you've just wrapped up season 2. Is that right?
It is correct. And thank you for having me. So I wrote a book called The Buy Side, which published in 2013. And what happened was it was optioned by Sony, and they put a team together. And so going into 2014, there were a number of competing projects. And apparently there was this show over at Showtime that was, about to be bought, and so then they announced it, and Sony kind of, dragged their feet a little bit and got lukewarm because they were nervous that there was already a Wall Street project out there. And so my book went away from the Hollywood side, and I don't know, maybe 6 months later, I got a phone call from the 2 executive producers, and they said, "Hey, we'd love for you to read the pilot. Give us your thoughts or whatever. We're going to be shooting in a couple of weeks. Are you up for it?" And I said, "Yeah, definitely." And so I read it twice in one weekend, went in there, and basically just, gave them my opinions. And, it might have been, a hedge fund guy would have never said this, or this is how this might go down. And that's all I did. And, after we had a meeting, they said, we would love to hire you as a consultant on the show. And so for the last 2 seasons, basically what I do is they'll send me drafts of the episodes. I read them, give notes, send it back. And then when we're shooting, I go to set, 2 to 3 days for each episode whenever we're doing Wall Street or hedge fund stuff. And I sit there and, whether it's talking to Damian Lewis about what something actually means or, any of the other actors or the director or whatever. And I'm there basically to try to make it as authentic as possible.
That's very cool. I mean, that must be like your ideal job right now. You lived this crazy life in your 20s and 30s on Wall Street. You left Wall Street, said you didn't want to go back there, kind of put the nail in your own coffin to a certain extent in terms of a Wall Street career. And you wanted to get into writing and that sort of thing. So here you are working on the set of Billions. That's very cool.
Yeah, I'm very grateful, and it's an amazing opportunity, because I'm working with people at the highest level. Paul Giamatti, Damian Lewis, the two showrunners, Brian Koppelman and David Levine, Showtime. So it's an amazing opportunity and experience, and just even going back to my Wall Street days. How there's value in everything you do, right? So it's not always about the paycheck. So in terms of an opportunity or a job, working on this show it's a home run for me because my expertise is I live the life, and I also get to partake in a very creative venture. So it's a phenomenal job for me.
Yeah, that's excellent. I'm pleased it's worked out for you.
Have you seen the show?
I'm about halfway through the first season.
Okay.
So I'm slowly working my way through it, and I'm loving it. It's really cool. It's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah. We just wrapped season 2, and that'll be out in February.
Excellent, man. I'm looking forward to it. Now, as I kind of hinted just before, you have one hell of a story of spectacular excess, as you describe it. But so we can get a grasp on where you've come from, what was your upbringing like? Were you born into money, or did you have somewhat humble beginnings?
All right. So I grew up in a small town in Maine in a house heated by a wood stove. I had 3 older sisters. Very, very, very naive. If you can imagine how backwards Maine was, in the 80s, this is pre-internet, pre-cell phone, it was pretty simple way of life. And I graduated high school, ended up going to Ohio University. And I was a journalism major, B student. I had 970 SATs. And so when I left for New York City in January of 1994, I had probably $1,400 in the bank. I was driving a giant U-Haul with a lobster on it that said "America moves from Maine." I had LL Bean boots and J. Crew jacket and a baseball hat, and I was like, all right, let's do this. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And when I initially got to New York, I still wasn't even remotely interested or even aware of Wall Street. I thought I was going to get a job at, a magazine or newspaper or public relations. And, and this is no lie, it's no exaggeration. When I was driving the U-Haul down to New York City, my buddy and my roommate was telling me about a friend of his who got an interview at Goldman Sachs, and he was looking at me like I thought I would be impressed or something, and I literally thought that Goldman Sachs was a fancy department store. I had no clue. So yeah, not born into money. The one thing that I had over other people was an uncle who worked in the business, and when I initially called him, I was thinking I knew he had money, I knew he was successful, figured he must know some important people. So I called him up looking for him to help me get a job, not a job on Wall Street, but I wasn't able to articulate, what I wanted. And he hung up on me and said, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. And when he called me back, I had 10 interviews on Wall Street.
Wow. Okay. So he got you these interviews on Wall Street for obviously a position on Wall Street, but you really wanted to get into journalism. Did you just think that this Wall Street thing would be a temporary gig until you got yourself set up as a journalist?
No, I mean, look, I was 23, 24 years old. I really wasn't looking that far ahead. I knew from my bank account, like, I needed a job. You know what I mean? Like, at my low point, and this is nothing against retail or the Gap or anything like that, but I was coming back from, another rejection, and I passed by the Gap, and I was like, oh my God. And I walked in there and I asked for an application, and I brought it home, and I was like hiding it because I didn't want my roommates seeing it. But like, I was at the point where I just desperately needed a job. So I called my uncle up, and I was basically saying, well, hey, Uncle Tucker, I really kind of need a job. And he's like, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. So when he called me back, he said, all right, you got 10 interviews this week. And I said, for what? And he said, oh, just tell him you want to get into sales. I was like, oh, okay. And so I hung up the phone, and I was terrified. And my first interview was at Lehman Brothers, which I believe was 2 or 7 World Trade Center. I forget. And so I go down there in my Filene's basement, untailored suit. Basically, it was the only suit I owned at the time. And I go down there and I go up the elevator and I get off and I'm terrified because God forbid they ask me something remotely, close to something I should know. I would have no clue. And so I'm in the waiting room and I'm waiting. And then all of a sudden this dude comes out, probably late 30s, early 40s. And seems super caffeinated up, and he's talking a mile a minute, and he's just like super intense, and he grabs me and he's like, all right, let's go. And we go out into the trading floor, and it was right around the open. And so here I am at Lehman Brothers, January 94, and the opening bell rings, and it was just utter madness. It was very similar to walking out to a casino floor for the first time. And there was just something about the intensity and the utter grandness of it all where I didn't know what they were doing, but I said, I want in. And so that's when I really kind of caught the bug, was just seeing this trading floor of a few hundred men and women who all seemed like they were smart and successful and made a lot of money and just, intense. And that's when I kind of was just like, all right, whatever, this journalism thing, just, sign me up. And, it took many, many interviews because, as like I said, a B student from Ohio University with a journalism degree, even in 94, is not that appealing. So a lot of the interviews were really just sort of favors to my uncle. And it wasn't until Morgan Stanley where I got an opportunity.
Yeah. So tell us about that. What were you doing at Morgan Stanley? What was your job there?
So it ended up being a fantastic job. It was called PCS at the time, Private Client Services. They've since changed the name to PWM, Private Wealth Management. But I was an assistant. I was a sales assistant, and my job was to work with a team of brokers or a broker. But the beauty of it was, we were selling, almost every product that Morgan Stanley offered. And, it was an opportunity for me to get my licenses and to learn about all the different products and the different departments. And, it ended up being a much, much longer haul than I initially expected. I thought I was going to work there for 6 to 12 months and be given some, great opportunity on the trading floor and be knighted, but that it didn't play out that way. But it ended up being a great job. And so I was just working with, I bounced around a little bit, but I ended up working with some of the top brokers on the floor, and I was trading for their clients. And, I was, of course, doing all the administrative and, paperwork bullshit, whatever. But I was getting to learn, all different sides of Wall Street, so it was a phenomenal opportunity.
Okay, so when you were working there at Morgan Stanley as a sales assistant, who were you actually selling to? Like, who were the clients that you were working for?
So I would be an assistant to a team that already had their client base, right? So we were dealing with middle markets, like some mid-sized institutions who were just straight equity and they were trading, but the bulk of our clients were high net individuals. And this isn't like a Schwab account or Dean Witt or anything like that. This is people who are worth 10, 20, 50, 100 million, and could swing it around if they wanted to. So, it wasn't your usual retail account. It was someone who had real money and wanted the, exposure, and diversification.
Okay. So how long did you stay around for at Morgan Stanley before you moved on?
I was there for 5 years, and I was literally at the point where I was ready to give up because I thought 5 years was way too long. At the time, I was 28, 29 years old, and I'm like, shit. I'm like, if I haven't made it by now, then I'm a loser, and I should pack my stuff and ship out. And it wasn't until like I had completely, almost given up that I ended up getting a call from the Galleon Group, which was at the time a up and coming hedge fund. And when I got the call, the only reason I got it was because I spent a number of years doing happy hour across the street, and there were some ex Morgan Stanley people there, and they needed a new assistant. And, again, super naive and not very aware of the world around me, but I hadn't been dealing with hedge funds. So when I was offered a job at a hedge fund, I was kind of like, whoa, what's a hedge fund? I mean, I knew, but I had no idea how big opportunity it was. And I was just like, all right, I'll go over, I'll check it out. And I quickly learned, being a client and being on the buy side for, even a $300 million hedge fund in 99 was a big deal. And so I ended up getting that opportunity just literally from being fun and doing happy hour for a number of years while I was at Morgan Stanley.
Okay. So what was that like working at Galleon Group? Like, what was your sort of first impressions when you walked through the doors there, like day one?
I mean, and this is no exaggeration, but I think my boss said to me once, and this is early on, he said, every day expect to be fired, and if you're not, it was a good day. And yeah, and just like you, I kind of chuckled, and my boss did not. And I didn't realize how serious he was. And it started every single morning in the shower. I'd be getting ready for work, and I would start to panic and say, oh my God, did I book this wrong? Did I send that trade to the wrong prime broker? Did I forget to do anything? Because, and I get it, but a simple little mistake or just me not crossing a T or dotting an I at a hedge fund like that could be $1 million error. And so, I just, up until that point, I had not been operating at such a high intense level where, if you're not good, you're out the door. And so it was a whole new, kind of learning curve, and I was right back to being low man on the totem pole. And it was just like, it was insane because, here we are, it's the 90s, and it's the Wild West. Insider trading was completely the norm. It was like, and this wasn't me early on because I was still just like assisting on the desk, but you were calling people up and saying, hey, I need to know what they're going to report tomorrow. And and I need to know if this acquisition's going through, and I need to know when, and are you upgrading this tomorrow, because I need to know now, and that was just common, and the numbers were just head spinning, because the first year we were up triple digits, and so I didn't know any difference, and I'm saying to myself, I'm like, oh well, I got 15 grand in my account here. And, if we're up 100% for the next 15, and I'm doing the numbers like on a calculator as if like that was a possibility. So, I would learn quickly that that wasn't a normal market and those weren't normal returns, but it was insanity on a daily basis. But I loved it and I thrived on it. So,
yeah. And did you see, like, it sounds as though it was very cutthroat. Did you see many people come and go, like getting fired for making errors? Was that a common occurrence?
It was, and I would say it happened much more often on the analyst side than it did. The trading side was a little tighter knit, and not that we were in a bubble, because our own bosses were pretty vicious, but and I say this jokingly, but there's a lot of truth to it. I would see a new analyst show up and they'd, go into one of the, offices that wasn't occupied. And in my mind, I'd be like, well, I'm not going to take the time to get to know them. I'm going to wait 2 weeks, because so often someone would come in and either they didn't like the culture or they could not keep up and they would be gone shortly. So if they were in their office for more than 2 weeks, then I felt like it was safe to introduce myself.
That's funny. I had a job, my first job out of school was much the same as well. The staff turnover was through the roof, and we kind of had the same attitude there as well.
Right. It was nuts.
Yeah, so you mentioned your boss there. Who was your boss?
For a small place, it was like I had, anybody who was a partner was technically my boss. But the guy who ran the trading desk, his name was Gary Rosenbach. And he was, I guess you would call him, he was number 2 behind Raj Rajaratnam. But I worked directly with a guy named David Slane, who he was called by Bloomberg a dream informant. And he helped take down something like 38 people in the whole insider trading web. That wasn't until, much later. But, number 1 was Raj Rajaratnam. He's currently serving time. I think it was the largest sentencing in the history of Wall Street for insider trading. Number 2 was a guy named Gary Rosenbach, who mysteriously left the business right before Galleon got pinched and went down, and he's in Colorado, maybe. I don't know what he's doing. And David Slane is trading his own money. He was number 3. He cooperated and avoided doing prison time, but in some respects, I would say he's still serving, because there's some reputational damage that happens, if you end up cooperating. And number 4 was a guy named Christian Sood, who was the healthcare PM, and I ended up leaving Galleon with him to start a hedge fund called Argus, and he's currently, I believe, running money under some multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, but I haven't kept tabs on him.
Okay, so I want to ask you about Raj. I'm not going to try to pronounce his
Rajaratnam.
Yeah, that's the one. I want to ask you about him a little bit, because he, as you said, he's serving 11 years in prison for insider trading. What was it like working for him? Like, he was your big boss. What was he like as a trader?
Well, I mean, I literally sat, there was a glass wall between me and Raj, and his office was right behind the trading desk. And he actually was very kind of happy-go-lucky. In my book, I described it almost as every time he came into the office, it was like he was a homecoming queen in a float, and just kind of like doing that little half cup hand wave as he would walk into the office and someone would be dropping rose petals in front of him. I never really felt the wrath or the venom from Raj, which he was 100% capable of. But he used to, he was the kind of guy who would prefer to, like, stab you in the back and then smile, versus, kind of making you feel the pain and enjoying you, just wither away. There's one thing I talk about in the book, and I called it the Raj cockfight model. And I suspect that many other hedge fund guys, or people who are successful in business, I mean, Donald Trump could be accused of this, but, what he would do is he would find two people who are essentially peers, equal skill, equal level. Maybe they have the same title. And what he would do is he would do it himself, but he would create this rivalry between two, like individuals in the firm. And then he would like to sit back and he would watch them scratch each other's eyes out until, one was a bloody mess on the floor and got swept out and the other one survived. But what it would do is it would create such competition and such like grit between the two that he would maximize what he would get out of both employees until one was done.
Sounds very intense.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to do that with me and one of the other traders, but she and I, she was the one who got me the job, and we just maintained communication after work, like in private, on the phone, and would share with each other what they were saying about the other one, and so I was able to avoid it, but I saw it happen over and over and over again, and it would get vicious, but Raj would end up making a lot of money.
Okay, we'll continue in just one moment. Here is a mention for our sponsor and a friend of Chat with Traders, TradeStation. TradeStation, as you know, is an award-winning online broker which connect professional and retail traders with all the bells and whistles to better monitor and participate in markets. Better monitoring in the sense that in addition to providing brokerage services, TradeStation also provide technology in the form of an award-winning platform which boasts advanced real-time analysis tools. And better participate in the sense which TradeStation provide fast trade execution with equities, ETFs, futures, and options, all with very reasonable commissions and brilliant support when you need it. To fully understand why traders trade with TradeStation, please visit tradestation.com. And if you have any questions, don't be shy. Just reach out to their support team. Again, the link to visit is tradestation.com. So when did Raj eventually get caught out for insider trading?
Ironically, it was on the day of my last drink and drug, but he got arrested on October 16th, 2009, and then was sentenced in, it was right around Occupy Wall Street, like October of 11, and then I think he went away like in December of 12, something like that.
Okay, and what led to him being caught out?
Well, I mean, I have my own theory. If you look at, kind of all of the documents, supposedly the Galleon case was opened in 2006 or 2007, so that doesn't quite line up with my theory, but I believe that it's probably a combination. With everything that happened with the financial collapse, and then no one going to prison and no one, really kind of getting any consequences, I felt like in 2008, 2009, they said, well, someone's got to go down, and the next best headline is insider trading and hedge fund guys. Meanwhile, hedge funds had nothing to do with the bailout, right? Or CDOs, or you know what I mean, mortgage-backed. Hedge funds didn't create them, and hedge funds didn't get bailed out. But so I believe it was part of a desire to get the headlines against Wall Street. So the more scandals and insider trading rings that they could bring down would appease the public a little bit more and make Main Street feel a little bit more comfortable that Wall Street was being policed. So I think it was kind of a combination of really bad timing after the financial collapse, and it was the easiest fruit to pick off.
Sure. And you yourself have said in the past that you operated in a grey area yourself. Were you ever investigated or get caught up in this mess?
I don't know if I was investigated. A couple of times I had to sign off on letters from the SEC. Like it would say, you bought 250,000 shares of, HMA 30 minutes before Citigroup upgraded the entire hospital sector and upgraded the stock. And, by signing this, you're, admitting that you had no prior knowledge, blah, 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 blah. So that was the extent of the stuff that I ever got caught up in. But it's impossible to know, whose names were being floated around. And with all of the phones that were being tapped, if you were on one of those phone calls, well, guess what? They're writing your name down and maybe they're looking at you. So I have no idea how deep it went. Whether this is fortunate or unfortunate, I don't know. But when I left Galleon, I was still operating in a gray area, but drugs and alcohol ended up consuming my life much more than trying to figure out what Apple's earnings are going to be next week. I very easily could have got caught up more than I did. But I was all about the party and that's the path I chose.
Absolutely. And we're going to get right into that very shortly. Before we do, though, I just want to have a couple questions about you as a trader. So you started at Galleon Group as another assistant. How did you sort of come to be a trader and a portfolio manager there? And how did you perform as a trader?
It was kind of like they would give you a shot, and if you were good, they would just keep on letting you go. So I did start as an assistant, but it quickly turned into, I was the number 2 guy on the healthcare portfolio, and we were trading. It was over $1 billion, and so I had a lot of responsibility, and so it was a great gig. And about a year and a half into my time at Galleon, the guy to my right, the head trader for the healthcare portfolio, said, "Hey, I'm leaving. I'm starting my own hedge fund. You can come with me if you want, but why don't you stay here and see how they treat you?" And so in 18 months, I went from assistant to the head trader on $1 billion fund. And it was sink or swim. And, I ended up being able to produce. And, Galleon at the time and eventually on to Argus, we ran kind of a hybrid. Very often you'll hear about like an execution trader or proprietary trader. But we would do both. Obviously I was executing everything for our PMs and our analysts, but if I saw an opportunity to make some money, I would do it. And back then it was really about information, and it was much easier to to get ahead, and I was good at gathering information. I was good at making new relationships, and one of the things I learned there, that I took with me, I was able to kind of take emotion out of it. And so I used to keep a little notebook, right, where whether I was talking to an analyst or, somebody over the phone, or I came to my own conclusion or came with my own thesis, when I was able to do that void of any emotion, I would write it down on, in a notebook. And, like, let's say, I'm just giving a random example, but, let's say I was talking to one of my analysts and he was like, oh man, if Apple was ever trading at, 200, I would pack up the truck and, because of A, B, and C, this is why I would buy it. And then, sure enough, 2, 3, 4 months later, for whatever reason, Apple would be trading at that level. And I would go into his office and I would say, hey, has anything changed fundamentally? And they're like, no, but, the market's getting killed and the market's off and we can't buy it now. And I'd be like, fuck that. I'm like, we're buying it. And what I found was that most people that I was working with couldn't remove emotion. And so I would try to gather information that had no emotion attached to it. And if I could sign off and figure out that, all right, the story hasn't changed and everything is still the same, they just don't like the current market environment, like that would be a huge buy for me. And so, I very early on, I learned that if you can take emotion out, you become a much, much better trader.
So what were some of your greatest trades? Like you said, during that time when you were at Galleon, your biggest edge was the information that you could get hold of. And this wasn't just information that was coming from your analysts internally. What was some of the best information that you got externally that led to your greatest trades?
My first big trade, I got a phone call from at the time it was a small boutique called Leering Swan, and a headline hit the tape, and my sales trader called me and said, oh, generic, they're going to discontinue generic Prozac. And so I was like, okay, whatever, shearing plow, generic Prozac, not a big deal. And I kind of dismissed it. And then I got a call again, and my sales trader was like, no, they're like, not, the trade isn't shearing plow, the trade is Sepulchre. And so then I started kind of doing a little bit of work. And so it was a derivative play of what the news was. But at the time, and I'm making the number up because I don't remember, but, Sepulchre's earnings 2 or 3 years out was like 80% based off of this generic Prozac. And the stock at the time was trading, I forget, but it was probably like $120. It was probably trading like, I don't know, 15 or 16 times 2002 or 2003 earnings. And, not that the stock was zero, but it was going to get dramatically cut. And so I just went out there and I just started buying puts. And at the time it was scary because it was a bull market. And, I was just buying 500 puts at a clip, and the stock went from, I don't know, like 120 to 90. And I was still buying puts. And so at the time, I think I had a few 100,000 or, equivalent to a few 100,000 shares short of Sepulchre. And, it was $5 below my cost basis. And, so I made a quick $1 million in like 20 minutes. And that was kind of my first big trade where I was like, oh, maybe I can do this, and then, a few years later I was at Argus, and it started off as a simple conversation, but my med tech analyst told me about this new trend that was happening. He said, hey, he goes, hospitals are no longer hiring nurses. They're using these staffing companies. And I was like, okay. And he's like, yeah, he goes, he's like, it's the numbers just, keep coming in. He's like, it's a big trend. And so I started to look into it and I started to ask questions, and these staffing companies were I mean, they were ridiculous to trade. Like, I'm talking like 80,000 shares a day. But I was like, screw it. I'm like, let's go for it. And I bought a slew of names, and this took much longer. It was more of like a 3 to 6 week trade, and I just wanted to get my positions in before they reported. And this is another, and I don't even know if it's a trick or the trade or whatever, but once I got my positions in, I mean, this isn't Einstein, but once I got my positions in, and I got the solid research and evidence to back it up from my analysts, I started to share the story with guys that I liked. I didn't cast a wide net because I wanted other people to make money, right? If you tell 50 guys the same story, guess what? Nobody makes money. They all, none of them owe you a favor. So, I started to share with a couple of guys saying, hey, look, I'm long these names. This is what's going to happen when they report. And, you might want to get in. And so the stock started to move up before they reported. Once a couple of my friends were in the trade, then I shared it with somebody on the sell side, and they were like, holy shit, this is great. And as they were reporting, they were upgrading, the entire sector and all of the stocks. And it was just kind of like this perfect storm. So, I identified the trade. I did the work, got the positions in. Then I shared it with a couple of people that I wanted to look good. And then I shared it with somebody on the sell side. And then it hit. And so it ended up being a home run all the way around because I made a ton of money. I had 2 or 3 other buy-siders who now wanted to help me because they made a shitload of money on the trade. I got a guy on the sell side who thinks I made him look like a hero because he was ahead of the street on the call. And the whole time I'm selling my stock on that day. So it was a big trade.
Yeah. Wow.
Sorry for rambling.
No, that was awesome. I appreciate it. Now, for us outside of the hedge fund world, do you just want to explain the mechanics of buy side and sell side and sort of how they operate together?
Sure. So, in the simplest terms, the buy side is the client. So, if you're sitting there in your underwear trading your, E-Trade account, you're considered the buy side. It has nothing to do with buying. It just means you are a client of the sell side. So the sell side is any broker who is in the business of customer facilitation, and they execute your orders. So if you're on the buy side, you're buying, you're selling, you're trading, you're doing whatever you want to do, and the people on the sell side, whether it's Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or some tier 4 broker, they are facilitating your orders. They're providing research. They're sometimes housing your portfolio. And the idea is, the sell side helps the buy side, and the buy side pays the sell side commissions.
Okay. So in your position as a hedge fund manager, the sell side were very keen to get your business, correct?
Very.
Okay. So how did they try and get your business? Like, talk to us a little bit about the social aspect, the wining and dining that goes on. Right.
Some of that, I mean, and I'll preface it by saying some of this has gone away, but a lot of it is still very valid and present. So in, let's say 2003, I'm 33 years old, and I'm the head trader of a $1.4 billion portfolio, and I am trading in commissions about $50 to $60 million a year. So every single person on the sell side wants a piece of that $50 to $60 million. And of course, you pay your Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, you pay those guys, $2-3 million a year, but $50-60 million goes a long way. And so basically people would be wanting to either give me great information, proprietary information, trading ideas, providing research, and just making my job as easy as possible. Because when I had, a million shares of Johnny John to buy, they wanted me to call them. And then on the other side of that, they had unlimited expense accounts. So I could legitimately go out to dinner every single night of my life for 50 years, and it never would have ended. Any restaurant, any bar, any sporting event. I've been flown to Super Bowls on private jets. I've been taken to Sundance Film Festival. I've been offered surf camp in Costa Rica. I've been flown to Cancun. I mean, you name it. It was offered to me, and the idea was, and there's so much truth to this. You take me to dinner. We have a good time, whether that leads into, us scoring drugs or going to a strip club or getting hookers, or maybe it's just a good old fashioned, get fucked up night at the bar. Well, during that time, you're bonding, and hopefully a friendship or something is developing and cultivating, and they're hoping that, if they spend 10 grand on you, a couple nights a year, that's worth $1 million in commissions. And so, obviously you do the math. That's 10 grand well spent, right? A lot of that has changed in terms of just the ability for a hedge fund guy or a buy side guy to pay whoever they want. So a lot of funds do now have what's called a list, and so certain brokers or all brokers need to be on the research list. So back then I could pay a friend of mine who had his own broker dealer on the floor and maybe was trading out of his apartment. I could get away with doing $200,000 a year with him. These days, most places have to get every broker approved. But they kind of came down on expense accounts, and the way they worked around it these days is, if let's say you're at a tier 4, tier 5 broker, and you want to do a lot of business with an account, you'll still take them out and you'll still spend all of that money. You just don't run it through your credit card. And so you take the hit personally. You'll spend 20 grand on an account over the year. But if they're paying you, $400,000 in commissions, it's a huge win. So, very often, whether you're at a bulge bracket firm or at a lower tier firm, they'll do a lot of this entertaining off the books. So there's no paper trail, but the commissions are still there.
Right. Okay. So it gets a bit shady.
Yeah.
So you said that if you wanted to, you could go out for dinner every single night of your life for 50 years. How often were you going out and socializing with the sell side? When I was single, all the time. But I mean, it got to the point where I was just like, if I had one more steak dinner or if I had one more martini, I was gonna explode. And so, I mean, it got to the point where I would just say, people would call me up and they say, Turney, they're like, I have to take you out, or I'm going to get in trouble with my boss or whatever. And I said, dude, take your girlfriend out for a nice dinner and put my name on the receipt. I'm like, I don't want to go out. And they'd be like, no, I need. And I said, and I'd be like, all right, I'll trade 200,000 shares with you right now if you don't ask me to go out with you again. And they'd be like, okay. And then I'd be like, all right, buy 200 spies. It was truly unlimited. I would say from, obviously, September 11th, didn't change the game, but it shifted people's focus for a short period. But from 98 to 2008, it was pretty unlimited. So tell us a little bit about how this led to a lot of partying, a drug habit, alcoholism. Is that a word? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
How did that kind of come about? Obviously, it was a flow-on effect from so much sort of partying and socializing. Tell us about how that got a little bit out of hand.
It's interesting because one of my best skill sets, or one of the things that allowed me to be successful, was my ability to socialize, to be out at night. When the office lights went out and the city lights came on, like that's when I really shined, and that's what helped me get to the top. And it also ended up being kind of my biggest detriment also. I was always, party guy. I was always, fun and tried to be the life of the party. And, I never ever thought I would do cocaine. And first time it was offered to me, I wasn't even sure what to do with it. And I went to the bathroom and I was like, do I do the whole thing? Or, oh my God, are they going to know I didn't do any? And I was freaking out, and I went back out there and handed it back off, and I didn't touch it. But 6 months later, I'd gotten a big bonus, so my bank account had changed. I got a new job title. I was running around with a faster group, and it didn't seem so menacing anymore, and it felt like it was part of the culture. And so I tried it, and the first time I did it, I was like, oh my God, like this is the greatest thing I have ever done in my entire life. And on my way from the bar back to the rooftop, I said, okay, this is probably going to be a problem at some point because I feel so good. But I can't worry about that now. And, at first it was a slow progression. It was, I was still drinking 4 or 5 times a week, but, I was, cocaine only showed up every once in a while. And then it kind of turned into once a month. And then shortly thereafter, it was once a week. And then soon as I got the direct phone number of a dealer, that's kind of when the wheels started to come off. And, it would take another 2 years or so for me to completely blow myself up. But I kind of look at it as like this giant cocktail. It was drugs, it was sex, it was money, it was alcohol, it was power. And it was kind of all mixed into one. And, I've been very careful to say, like, Wall Street or my job, like, none of that made me an addict or an alcoholic. I believe I was kind of born this way, but all of that fed into this undying need to be adored. And, I kind of suffer from the disease of more, and bigger is better. And once I got a taste of cocaine, it was like I had found this thing that I'd been looking for my entire life. And it eventually got out of hand, and I could not stop.
So if I heard you right or understood you correctly, it took you about 2 years from the first time you tried cocaine until you were pretty much using it each and every day. Is that right?
I would say about 2 years before I was using it weekly. And then it was somewhere between like year 3 and 4 where it kind of became daily.
Right. And do you have any idea how much you were spending on any given week on drugs, alcohol, and hookers?
Well, so the cocaine I would usually make people from the South Side give to me. So, like some broker I would call up and say, hey, dude, meet me at 415. And that was code for, because 420 is synonymous with weed, I decided that 415 meant cocaine. So I would be like, meet me at 415 on the corner of 54th and Park. And so the coke, I mean, it wasn't always free, but because I also, used the dealer, but the coke was probably $200 to $300 a week, only because I was getting a lot of free coke. But, the hookers, were before I started dating my girlfriend and she got pregnant. The hookers were, probably started happening, I don't know, maybe once a week. So that could run anywhere from $400 to $2,000, right? But it was also the things I was doing, on cocaine or drunk or being out or, you know, hookers involved or whatever. Like if I was messed up and I decided that we needed to get a helicopter and fly to Atlantic City, like we would do it. So it was the grandiosity of being on cocaine where I probably spent the most money.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Man. So what was your most memorable, and I should probably use that word lightly, but what was your most memorable night?
Oh God. I mean, like, good night or bad night? I mean,
let's hear both.
I don't, I mean, it's a shame because like good night, I'll give the nod. I'll say, even though it wasn't, but it was a great night initially. My 34th birthday party, so October 2003, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, but I hired a band called Naughty by Nature, a couple of other bands, and they performed, and it was just this insane night of 500 of my closest friends, drugs all over the place, out in the open, and just, a night that never ended. And, that was before I'd kind of gone into the black hole of addiction. So I was still having fun. That was a pretty big night. I would say, one of the most memorable, bad nights was obviously not a night at all. It was, more like 5 a.m, but I'd been up for 3 days straight. And I'd called in sick so many times that if I called in sick again, I'd be fired. But if I showed up for work in the state that I was in, I would be fired. And this was October of 2006. So I ended up getting the brilliant idea that if I had been mugged, that they wouldn't expect me to work. So I proceeded to slam my body into a puddle on the pavement numerous times until I'm bleeding and bruised and my suit is ripped and I'm soaking wet. And I limped into the hedge fund, and I could barely speak. And I just said, I was mugged. And I turned around and walked out. And, needless to say, I was in my first rehab, 48 hours later.
Did anyone see you throwing yourself into that puddle?
I don't think so, but it's possible.
Okay. That would have been awkward.
Yeah.
Just to put things into perspective here, how much money were you making on an annual basis by the time you reached your 34th birthday?
My biggest year was 1.9. And I had a couple of 7-figure years. But from when I started at Galleon, which was, let's say, middle of 99, until 2007, or 2008, I made $10 million, I would say, over like a 7-year period.
How much of that would you say was your salary, and how much of that was bonuses?
I mean, for the most part, it was bonus. But when I went over to Argus, and then I went to rehab and came back and I went to jail, Berkowitz, which is Jim Cramer's old fund, I negotiated a percentage of the profits. So as long as we didn't even have to make money. Like one year, when we were over $1 billion, the management fee alone paid me, I don't know, $600,000-$700,000 just from my percentage. So I call it a bonus, but I negotiated, a minimum percentage of the profits. And one interesting thing that we were doing over at Argus, which I thought was good. So I had a fixed percent of something like, I think 6% or something, by the time I left, but we would have what was known as a jump ball. And so there was always 15%, maybe 10, 15% of the bonus pool that was up for grabs. But, sometimes that bonus pool was $5 million. And so anyone in the firm could get, part of that. And so, that would make people, work harder and try to get more than what their percentage was.
Sure. Now, leading this type of lifestyle, did this ever cloud your judgment at work? Like you said there, you're controlling large amounts of money, like billions of dollars. How were you able to perform at work?
Without a doubt, it clouded my. I mean, I went from kind of being the golden boy to, almost having to go to rehab whether I wanted to or not. But I would start making mistakes and just careless stuff or being hungover. I don't care how smart you are. If you're hungover, you're less likely to pay attention and you're not going to pick up as many lights, or you're not going to send out as many emails, or, you're not going to be capable, and you're not going to be operating at 100%. And so, near the end, like I was telling you before about 2005 and 2006, I was averaging, playing, I would call it, playing through, meaning that I never slept. And I was doing that at least once a week for a good 2 years there, so showing up to work at 6:30 or 7 in the morning on zero sleep, still coming down from cocaine. I don't care who you are, it's going to affect your work.
So why were you not sleeping? Is it because you were just partying too much? Had you taken too many drugs and actually couldn't sleep, or?
Couldn't sleep. Coke. I mean, if I just drank or smoked weed, like I could fall asleep, no problem. But, you're doing cocaine. There was two things would happen. A, I couldn't sleep, and B, I had to do more. I couldn't stop. And so, it was just this vicious cycle. I was down in Miami once, and I was hanging out with this, kingpin drug dealer from Miami, and he was like, "Oh, you from New York?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "New York, the city you can't sleep." Or no, he's like, "New York, the city that never sleeps." And I was like, yeah. And he goes, "Miami." He goes, "We're the city that can't sleep." And I was like, "Yeah, I get it."
So I'm just curious, when you're on cocaine, how long does the buzz or the high actually last for?
Initially, it was longer, but near the end, it was like your first line of the night would be fantastic, and you'd feel good for 15, 20 minutes, and then you would spend the next 12 hours chasing that high, and be completely miserable. So you do a line of cocaine, you feel fantastic for 15, 20 minutes, and then you keep snorting more and more and more and more because you're trying to get back to that original feeling, and you never quite do. And it's pretty miserable.
And were you taking more every 15 minutes or so?
Yeah, sometimes faster, sometimes, depending, sometimes you're trying to ration, like you're trying to make it through the night, it depends, but, more often than not, I would have a mound of cocaine and it would just be, probably every 15, 20 minutes I'm snorting.
That's full on. So when do you stop? Like you said, you just keep wanting to take more and more and more. When do you stop? Like literally when you run out, or when it's time to go to work?
Right. The first couple of years, I could actually come home, put the remaining Coke in my sock drawer. It would be hard to fall asleep, but I'd eventually fall asleep. And then there became a day where I was unable to stop until it was all gone. And, I'd put it in the sock drawer, and then I'd go lie in bed and stare at the ceiling and be like, I got to go to sleep. And then I'd just be like, screw it. And I'd get up and I'd go and be like, all right, let's have one more. And I'd just, tap out a nice little line and do it. And then I'd try to go back to bed, which was insane because I was never going to fall asleep. And there would be times where it'd be 4 a.m. and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to work tomorrow. And I would go to the toilet and I would flush the rest of the Coke in the toilet. and it'd be gone. And then like an hour later, I'm like calling or texting my dealer. I'm like, I need you to come back. And I mean, it was not not healthy.
At what point did you realize that something had to change? Like this was not sustainable?
I mean, like I said, the first time I did it, I kind of knew that there was an issue, but I always thought I'd be able to fix it. So it wasn't until, things were just kind of falling apart, like, because I had a couple of big years financially when I was still using almost every day. But, I started making mistakes at work and people were no longer, impressed with me. And, got to the point where, my girlfriend was not so sure she wanted me around anymore. And we had a daughter and, it was just kind of like, I woke up one day and realized like, this is not who I am. And this is not, how I'm supposed to act. And I thought I could kind of fix it on my own, but, it would take a lot more pain and saga in order for me to eventually clean it up.
So how did you go about fixing up this mess? Like, I think you mentioned earlier that you had a couple stints in rehab. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I ended up going to rehab twice, which, was good for the time being, but I never really learned how to be honest with myself. And the thing that the mistake that I kept making was I truly believed it and I kept believing the lie, but I really thought it was going to be different the next time. So I'd blow myself up and I would be like, oh my God, I'm never doing that again. And oh my God, I'm such an asshole. And I'd be like, all right, I'm done. And then 12 hours later, I would say, okay, well, I'm gonna just do a little coke tonight, and I'm gonna stop at midnight. And I really believed it when I would call the dealer, but it never happened.
So, what's your life like today?
I am living in the middle of Long Island, so I'm 40 miles outside of the city, and I live 2 miles from my daughter. I see her every day, and I try to get some writing done every day. And, all my life is very simple. I'm paying $1,300 a month for rent. I barely get by every month, but, I managed to do it. And I'm just trying to stay sober. I'm trying to write and I'm trying to be the best dad, friend, and son that I can be. And, interestingly enough, I've never been happier.
You made a lot of money during your stint on Wall Street. I think you said you made about $10 million. Where is that today?
I wish I knew. So, let's say I made $10 million, just for sake. We'll say, I lost 3 of it just from 3 or 4 from taxes. I was the owner of a fast food or a casual dining concept called Fat Burger for the state of New Jersey. So I put $1 million in that. That ended up being a 0. I bought a house in 2007 at the height of the real estate bubble. I bought that for $2.1 million. Put another $500,000 into it. I ended up selling that for $1.2 million. So I ended up, taking a bath on that. In my early 30s, I was living in a 2,700 square foot apartment, paying $9,300 a month in rent. I lived like that for a couple of years. So it was a combination of some bad investments. A house, an apartment that I bought, and living like an asshole for many years, and the money just went.
Yeah, sure. And you say that you're pretty much never been happier than you are right now. Why do you say that? I mean, because I presume that when you were living in this New York apartment, and living life big, you must have thought that was happiness at the time. Were you ever content with where you were?
No. So that's one of the things. I was never content. When I was at Morgan Stanley making $22,000 a year, I would say to my friends at the bar, if I could just make $50,000 a year, then all of my problems would be solved. And when I made $2 million, literally I said out of my own mouth, if I could just make $3 million a year, all of my problems would be solved. So that was never going to end. And so there was a moment back, after I'd left the business where, I'd kind of gotten my life back together and I still wasn't happy. And so I ended up going to the computer and I searched what the pursuit of happiness meant back in 1776 when they wrote the Declaration of Independence. And what I learned was that happiness used to mean courage and integrity and honor. And it was about how you lived your life. And I was like, when I read that, I was like, what? Because I always thought happiness was pleasure and material things and stuff like that. And so on that day, I was like, you know what? I don't even want to be happy. I was like, screw it. And I kind of just said, I just want to live a good life. Like I want to be a good person. And once I made that shift, so I went from a guy who wanted to live the good life to a guy who wants to live a good life. That's when it all clicked for me. And that's when I became happy.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people listening to this right now, and maybe even myself a little bit, we understand exactly what you're saying, but are you only able to say that and actually believe it because you have experienced it, because you've had that life experience?
Yeah. I used to say, I would say any asshole who says money can't buy happiness never had any money. Like that was my frame of mind, and I truly believed it. And so it's so cliche and you probably hear it all the time. So it's a difficult concept to grasp unless you get it, because and I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, but like no one wants to look in the mirror and say, hey, I could be doing more, or if only I had these things, my life would be so much easier. Because you know what? It's true. Money will make your life easier in a lot of respects. So it's hard to look beyond that. But I wouldn't have been capable of doing it without experiencing it myself. And like another thing that I sometimes talk about when I give talks, I inherently believe that most people are good, right? Most people have good intentions, but if you ask people to look at, okay, where's the line of your intentions and where's the line of your actions? The closer those two lines are together, the more successful and the more, I guess, good, or, however you want to phrase it, the closer those lines are together, intentions and actions, the better results you're going to get, just whether it's as a business person or just as a human being. And so one thing I try to do is I always try to line up my intentions with my actions. And when I do that, I feel much better about myself and I'm happy and I'm in a good mood.
Yeah, I think that's a clever way of looking at it. And, this is quite a complex sort of subject or thing to try and get right in your head, because, in some ways not being content is a good thing because it causes the competitive spirit to keep driving forward. But it can also be somewhat self-destructive in some ways as well, like you've experienced. So, I think it's really cool to get your thoughts on this. Turney, let's leave it at that. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Guys listening, if you want to pick up a copy of Turney's book or just take a closer look at it, it's called Buy Side, A Wall Street Trader's Tale of Spectacular Excess. You can find that at chatwithtraders.com/buyside. No dashes, all one word, of course. Turney, where else is the best place that listeners can go to find out a bit more about you?
You can buy the book on Amazon, but if you're looking for more, I have a website, which is turneyduff.com, TURNEYDUFF.com. I'm on Twitter, Turney Duff. I'm on Facebook, Turney Duff. So that's pretty much it.
Excellent. Very good, man. Well, I will be sure to include all those links in the show notes at chatwithtraders.com, and for a direct link to Turney's book on Amazon, chatwithtraders.com/buyside. Thank you, Turney.
Thank you, Aaron. Have a great day. Have a great holiday.
You've reached the end of this episode of Chat with Traders, but rest assured there are more episodes loaded with real market insight and zero hype on the way soon. So to stay updated with each great new release, subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and we'd love it if you'd leave a rating and review. We'll catch you next time on Chat with Traders.